Hello and welcome to the Marketing Practice Podcast 10 Year Out Alumni Series.
Tune in over the next 3 weeks as we bring you interviews from the alumni of 2011.
Find out where they are today, how the MDP has helped them in their career to date, and some of their fondest memories from their time on the MDP.
If you're interested in finding out more about the MDP, check us out on social media.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you shared this with your friends who might be interested in finding out about life on the MDP.
So today's guest is a former MDP, Sean Wiemann. So Sean graduated from the MDP in 2010 and he's currently working as a global brand manager for Monkey Shoulder at William Grant & Sons. So just to start us off, Sean, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what your current role involves at Monkey Shoulder?
Yeah, sure. So originally from Dublin, I did the MDP after doing a commerce degree in UCD. One of the first things, having studied obviously my undergrad and postgraduate in Dublin, was that I wanted to get abroad and work abroad for my first job. So I was lucky enough to get onto the Jameson graduate program. So I went straight to the States. And then from the States, I went to Germany. And then from Germany, I went back to Ireland, worked in the global HQ there. And then one of the things was that I was in a very commercial role. And I really wanted to get into brand building and working in a really brand-led role. And that kind of led me to changing jobs. I moved not too far. I moved within the same industry, but I moved across from Jameson. I moved to William Grant & Sons, who own Monkey Shoulder. And I worked in innovation for a couple of years there. Based out of Dublin, but it was global innovation. Which is a really interesting kind of learning ground. Innovation is really challenging. It's really different than kind of brand marketing for a big brand. So I did a few years of that, and then I wanted to move again. And I hadn't worked in Asia yet. So there was an opportunity to move to Asia. So I took that up, and I now look after Monkey Shoulder from a global brand point of view, and I work on a number of areas across from shopper marketing to global comms. But I'm based out of Singapore, which is a big Asia hub for a lot of brands, particularly Western brands. And I look after all of those aspects, but with a lens to the Asian markets, where we have to adapt quite a lot of what you might see in the UK or Ireland or the US. It's a very different culture here. And there's multiple different layers of cultures within all the markets within the region. So we need to adapt our communications quite a bit. So I work on that optimization here locally.
Okay, perfect. Wow, there's very interesting, a lot there. So you mentioned, so you did the Jameson program, so you and now you're working with Monkey Shoulder. So is working in the whiskey industry, obviously, was that something that you were interested in when you were in the MDP, or before you started going out into the working world? Was the drinks industry something that you were keen on?
Yeah, I would say one of the things is obviously, I'm sure it hasn't changed. The MDP is quite an intensive, it's an intense year.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, and obviously you're learning quite a lot, and you get exposed to the projects, to lots of different brands. But I think it's really important that you also take time to think about what you want to actually do next, what industries you might like. I was very clear that I wanted to move into FMCG. And just through a little bit of research, a few interviews I'd started to do, a little bit of research on things like the Jameson grad program. I just kind of thought that the drinks industry it's a really exciting industry that I wanted to get into. And I can confirm it is a really fun, ever-changing, high-energy, exciting industry to be part of. It's got lots of flex, like any FMCG. It's got its own unique channels. It's got its own, I suppose, restrictions and challenges that you have to work around. But at the same time, there's mass opportunities to do things, and it's a very, I suppose, it's an industry where a lot of people feel like they can relate to it because everyone loves going out for a drink and socializing. But actually, when you step back at it and you move back and you look at this from your job point of view, you're looking really at consumer insights and breaking that down, and what do the different, what does going out for a drink mean, and how do you then market towards that, which makes it very different. But I was always really interested in it. I thought it was just the kind of type of sector within FMCG that I really wanted to get into. And yeah, I've been in it nearly 7-8 years now.
Okay, so and you went through the MDP into the Jameson graduate program, so you were there for a little bit over a year. So like, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I know a lot of people in our course have applied for that as well themselves. It's like a huge one to kind of get into.
For the Jameson graduate program?
Yeah.
I mean, I can honestly say it was one of the best things I did. For me, it ticked 2 boxes. One is enabled me to get the hell out of Ireland after finishing college, and live in different places. I lived in Austin in Texas back when that was a place that not many people had heard of, but it's just a fabulous place to live. Particularly, I was 23 at the time, and at the same time, learning about an industry and learning more about marketing and sales and what it really means, and really practicing that. It's a fabulous program. I think people look at that aspect of going abroad internationally and the opportunities that it gives you on that level. But I would say beyond that, it's a really good program working for such a big company that they have the capability to give you this kind of training and capability training that, particularly when you're starting off and you might be looking at being an ABM, like an assistant brand manager, a junior brand manager, but it's really vital that you get that and you get to learn from people who've been in the industry for a long time and have worked in marketing for a long time. So you get great exposure within that program. So I would really recommend, if anyone is really interested in that side, that this industry is interested in marketing or sales, because I think that's the other thing that I would say is one of my things from the program is to really identify what part of marketing or sales or commercial you want to go into. But a program like Jameson, actually, they offer you the opportunity to figure that out while working for them. So you might start in a sales facing role and a more commercial led role, but you're still attached to the marketing side of things. And you still get to interact with the brand teams. So you actually get to figure out for yourself what area you might want to go into as a kind of more permanent kind of career, or more long-term career. A lot of people that I entered the program with went down the commercial route, for example. Others very much the brand route. And I think that's just up to each person as an individual.
Yeah, no, we've heard a lot of good things from people who have done the program. And like, it is great that it gives you that opportunity to kind of still discover what kind of direction you want to go down. But like you've had like a very like exciting career to date, and we're just wondering like what kind of things were you able to take from the MDP and actually apply to your career within like the last 10 years?
Well, I think as a starting point, having the experience of working with clients, and as much as we may joke about it, but some of the formalities that are attached to the program, the idea of presenting to clients wearing the suits, I think, as we mentioned earlier, I think it gives you a certain level of readiness for going into the working world. I can assure you that, certainly in a brand team level, that we don't have a very formal way about going about things, and it's much more of a creative space, where people are very much encouraged to be whoever they want to be, and not be restricted. Certainly not be restricted by wardrobe. But I think at the same time, the MDP does give you a little bit of readiness for that environment. It gives you a level of maturity, I would say, over some other graduates who come out fresh out of college and have I suppose, an assumption of what working life is like. And certainly from my point of view, the added level of going abroad, where you still have to deal with the fact that you're in a different working culture, and certainly US, very different working culture than what we have in Ireland and the UK. Asia, dramatically different working culture. I think the MDP does give you a certain level of groundedness and preparation for really tackling that. So I think that would be the key thing. And then other than that, I think the fact that you actually already get to work with real clients and understand what those interactions are actually like in the real working world is a real added bonus for the program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny you say about suits and the formal dress, because I know it's definitely something we all found a little bit weird on our first couple of days, when before for our undergrads we might turn up to college even in shorts and a tracksuit, but like, you really have to dress appropriately for our clients, and that is even though it sounds like a small thing, it is actually a little bit weird on the first couple of weeks to get used to. But we're just wondering, what made you choose the MDP originally, like when you were doing your undergrad degree, before you'd actually completed it? Like, what enticed you to go ahead and do it?
Well, I don't know. Should I give you a politically correct answer on that? I think there was a number of factors. I think one of the real honest responses to that was that I wanted to always do a master's, but I wanted to finish my college studies as quick as possible and actually start working. So the timing of the MDP, the location, the fact that it was in Dublin made it quite convenient for me to be able to do that. The other thing was that, while I was doing my undergrad, I'd already identified that I wanted to get into brand marketing and the brand strategy side of things. And I was already doing quite a lot of reading about it and learning, learning about that side of things and really piquing the interest in certain areas. But I think the practical element is the thing that really sold the MDP for me. That there was a good balance between theoretical and practical. And I'm pretty sure everyone who's left college and gone into their career will tell you that they've learned vastly more in the practical real world. The theoretical is great, and it helps you understand why some of the things are happening and why some of the decisions that, certainly at the beginning, why senior people are making some of the decisions. But everything, I think most people tend to learn more from the mistakes and the things they've got wrong. And I think that the fact that in the MDP you've already had a level of practical experience, I think that really will stand to anyone who's done it. And I think that's what appealed to me most, was just that I was taking on a year where it was not just going to be more theory on top of the theory that I already had.
Yeah. Okay. And Sean, you mentioned as well that, so you've obviously traveled a lot. So you've between, America, you went to Texas, and then you said Asia and Singapore. So you spent a lot of time abroad. And I know a lot of the current MDPs are hoping to travel at some point and work abroad as well. What would your advice be? And what have you learned from, I suppose, working abroad for so many years?
I think, I couldn't recommend to anyone, I couldn't be any stronger on recommending that you look abroad. I think it's one of my big regrets is for my undergrad is not studying abroad. I think living abroad is very different than visiting some of these places. Living somewhere gives you a real understanding of culture, and if you really want to be successful down the line, the world is becoming ever more globalized. COVID aside, it's putting maybe a bit of a pause on some of that. But I think, really understanding different cultures is going to be a massive benefit to anyone going forward. And actually, I would go so far as to say in most of the interviews for global brand roles, even if they're based in Dublin or London, people are looking for people who have traveled, worked, lived abroad, because it brings a certain level of maturity as well. And it also it can also, for some of the employers, and certainly, when we're looking at people, my team now, it's one of the things that we would always expect. It's because it's just very difficult to work on a global brand team where you're looking after markets across the world if you don't really have an understanding of what the consumer in those markets is really living through. So I would highly recommend for anyone to look abroad. And then the tips on how to do that is it's not easy to move. It takes time. You have to be willing to at times wait for the right roles to pop up. You have to be willing to accept that sometimes visas, work permits make certain roles really challenging. It tends to be easier with big companies. Yeah. And that's why I've been very fortunate. I've worked for two really big companies, and they tend to be much better at facilitating transfers within. So if looking abroad is something that you're really interested in, I would always say that the easiest route is to go with a bigger company. Do some time in either local office or look for some of their postings abroad. But they tend to be in a better position to move people around to different offices and really give people the support in doing that, because I think that's the other thing. It's not just a case of, you go get off a plane, you rock into an office in a city that you've never been to. There is a bit of adapting that needs to take place, and I think bigger companies are great at helping people transition through those kind of moves.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like there's so many different, so many people in the course have different ambitions to work in different countries. But you mentioned before that there was some real big kind of cultural differences in the different countries that you worked at. What kind of big differences would there be between Ireland and the US, or for what kind of advice would you give to someone who's going into a work environment, let's say in the US or Asia, that's different to Ireland?
So I think Asia is an easy one because it's so vastly different. In terms of the US, I think it can be just simple things, really simple things. And in terms of, I suppose in Ireland, for example, understanding, in Ireland, we're very fortunate. We've got free education, government-sponsored education. We have great opportunities for everyone to get a certain level of a certain standard of third level education, go on to even do masters, and come out, at a relatively young age with a really good educational grounding. In the US, it's a lot harder. I have a lot of friends of mine who are in their 40s and they're still paying off their loans from their undergrad. So it's a very different and understanding where they're coming from when they're taking their first job to where you might be coming from taking your first job. And then within the States, obviously understanding as well that it's a massive place and the culture is actually quite different throughout all the different parts of the States. I think that's a real thing that really struck me, certainly when I was younger. I'm moving somewhere like Texas, of how different Texas was to New York or California, where I'd been before. And then in Asia, I think it's a more extreme. I think working culture is very different. Working life is very different. It's, I suppose, in many ways, it's a little bit more what we might consider old school. So there's a little bit more of an expectancy to remain in the office till 7 o'clock. A little bit more clock watching. A little less, I suppose, wanting to rock the boat. So I think that's one of the big things that you have to understand, and certainly I've had to, adapt coming from Ireland, where everyone's pretty free to speak their mind and work, and, ideas are welcomed. That sometimes in different cultures, that might not be the best way to achieve the outcome that you desire. So people don't necessarily like to be openly confronted on an idea in public. There's certain ways that you work through that. There's certain hierarchies that you have to maneuver depending on if you're, for example, in somewhere like, so I would work in Japan, Korea, or China, where there's a very clear hierarchy of who you approach with what and who speaks in what meetings, which can be a little bit strange when you first go to these places and you're sitting in a meeting room and only 3 people out of the 10 in the meeting room are talking. But if you start to understand that, you find ways to get around that, and you understand that you might have to wait till certain people have left the room to talk to someone over a coffee on the side and really get what they're thinking. So I think it's things like that you learn, and you only learn that by living somewhere or meeting people and spending some time in a real work environment. You get those cultural nuances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose these are great things to know before you do head over. But just one last question from us, Sean, is just over the last 10 years, what has been the biggest highlight of your career?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would say probably 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when I was just before I started this current role, I was working with innovation, and I got to create and launch 2 whiskey brands. So I think at the time it felt like you were just part of this big process and driving this team to achieve something like a project and thinking of it as a project. But actually, when I look back now and I step back and I still go, I go into a Tesco in the UK or something and I see the product that, I remember where we came up with the name and where we came up with the pack design, and you can pull it off and buy it off the shelf. I think that's a really exciting thing. And, I've gone to lots of markets now, like Australia, and I saw the other whiskey brand that I created in a bar in Sydney. And a bartender, telling me about it. And again, remembering the day when we sat in a room and it was nothing but an idea on a piece of paper and, whiteboards out and thinking what it could be. So I think that to me was a real personal highlight, and I was very fortunate to do that as a relatively early stage of my career, to kind of work in that innovation space and actually create something tangible and a real brand.
Yeah.
So that would be my personal, I would say, highlight of the last 10 years.
Fab. Okay, well, we won't keep you much longer. So thank you so much, Sean. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. There's so much there that I'm sure everyone's going to be really excited to listen to. So we just want to thank you so much. And it's always really great to hear from past MDPs, and it's great to look forward to 10 years time and seeing what you've achieved in the past 10 years. So really appreciate everything. So thank you so much.
No problem at all. Happy to do it. Guys, I wish you the best of luck with the rest of the course. I hope it all goes well. And if any of you or any of the guys in the class have any questions or anything, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to offer advice on any of the things we talk through.
Thanks, Emil.